There's a rule among people who've lived in the Appalachian Mountains for generations. If you hear someone calling your name in the woods, especially if it sounds like someone you know, don't answer. Don't look back. Don't investigate. Keep walking, because you didn't hear anything. Most people assume that's superstition. Old mountain folklore designed to scare children into staying close to home. But what if it's not superstition? What if it's a survival protocol? A warning that's been encoded into culture because something in these mountains has been mimicking human voices long enough that our ancestors learned the only safe response is to ignore it completely. To understand why that rule exists, you need to understand something about these mountains that changes everything. Something that explains why they feel different from other forests, why the silence is oppressive instead of peaceful, why experienced hikers report a sense of wrongness they can't articulate, why the folklore here is darker and more persistent than anywhere else in North America. The Appalachian Mountains are 480 million years old. That number doesn't mean anything until you put it in context. The Rocky Mountains formed 70 million years ago. The Alps formed 65 million years ago. The Himalayas, the tallest mountains on Earth, formed 50 million years ago. These are young mountains, still growing, still sharp-peaked and dramatic, babies in geological terms. When the Appalachians formed, they were taller than Everest, taller than anything on Earth today. They were the Himalayas before the Himalayas existed. And for 480 million years, they've been eroding, wearing down, weathering. What you see today are the ancient roots of mountains that once dominated the planet. But here's what that age means. Here's what changes when you understand the timeline. The Appalachians are older than the Atlantic Ocean. When these mountains formed, North America and Africa were connected as part of the supercontinent Pangaea. These mountains were the center of that supercontinent. When Pangaea broke apart 200 million years ago, the Appalachians were already old, already ancient. They watched continents separate. They're older than trees. The first forests didn't evolve until 380 million years ago. The Appalachians were already 100 million years old when plants learned to grow tall. They watched the invention of trees. They're older than bones. Vertebrate animals didn't develop mineralized skeletons until 400 million years ago. The Appalachians were forming when animals were still soft-bodied. They watched the invention of bones. They're older than Saturn's rings. Saturn's ring system is estimated to be around 100 million years old. The Appalachians are nearly 5 times older than that. They are older than almost everything we think of as permanent, and that means something profound. It means these mountains have witnessed the entire history of complex life on land. They were here when the first vertebrates crawled out of the ocean. They were here when insects first took flight. They were here when reptiles evolved, when dinosaurs rose and fell, when mammals emerged, when humans finally appeared. 480 million years of watching life evolve. 480 million years of being a constant presence while everything else changed around them. And here's the question that should terrify you. What did they keep? Because mountains aren't just rock. They're ecosystems. They're habitats. And the Appalachians aren't solid. They're hollow, riddled with caves. Some of the most extensive cave systems on Earth run through these mountains. Mammoth Cave in Kentucky is over 650 kilometers of mapped passages, with potentially thousands more kilometers unexplored. But that's just one system. The entire Appalachian range is a labyrinth. Sinkholes, underground rivers, chambers so deep we haven't reached them, passages so complex we haven't mapped them, and caves are time capsules, environments that don't change. When surface conditions shift, ice ages, climate swings, extinction events, caves remain stable, dark, constant temperature, constant humidity. And life that enters caves and adapts to them can stay there, unchanged, for millions of years. Because if the environment doesn't change, there's no evolutionary pressure to change with it. We know this happens. We have proof. They're called troglobites. Cave-adapted animals that have been isolated for so long, they've evolved into something completely different from their surface relatives. The Appalachian cave crayfish. Blind, translucent, no pigmentation, because pigmentation requires energy, and there's no light to see color anyway. They descended from surface crayfish that entered the caves millions of years ago. Their surface cousins continued evolving, changing, adapting to new conditions. The cave crayfish stopped, frozen in evolutionary time. The Appalachian cave salamander. No eyes, no skin pigment, sensory systems we barely understand. They navigate by detecting minute changes in water pressure and chemical gradients. They've been isolated so long, they're barely recognizable as salamanders. And they're everywhere in these cave systems. Thousands of them. Populations that have existed in darkness for longer than humans have existed at all. So here's the question. If small animals can persist in these caves, isolated and unchanged for millions of years, what else could? What else might have retreated into these mountains when surface conditions changed? What might still be down there, in the deep caves we haven't explored, living according to rules that stopped applying on the surface millennia ago? 300 million years ago, the Appalachian region was tropical swamp forest, and the atmosphere was different. Oxygen content was 35%. Today, it's 21%. That extra oxygen changed everything about how life could exist. It allowed arthropods, insects, and their relatives to grow enormous, because arthropods don't have lungs. They breathe through spiracles, tubes that allow air to diffuse into their bodies. That system has size limits. At 21% oxygen, diffusion can't supply enough oxygen for an insect much larger than the biggest beetles we see today. But at 35% oxygen, diffusion works at much larger sizes. We have fossils from that period. Meganeura, dragonflies with 70-centimeter wingspans. Arthropleura, millipedes 2 meters long and half a meter wide. These weren't aberrations. They were normal for the Carboniferous period. The forests were full of them. Giant scorpions, massive centipedes, flying insects the size of hawks. Then oxygen levels dropped. Climate changed, and those giant arthropods went extinct. Couldn't sustain their metabolism on lower oxygen. Too large to survive. They died out around 300 million years ago. Except what if they didn't all die out? What if some retreated into the caves? Because oxygen levels in caves aren't uniform. Poor ventilation means some cave systems have higher oxygen concentrations than surface air. Pockets where 30 or even 35% oxygen can exist in isolated chambers with limited air exchange. What if populations of Carboniferous arthropods found those pockets, found caves where they could still breathe, where they could persist while their surface relatives died out? That sounds like speculation. It is speculation, but it's speculation based on the fact that we know cave environments can preserve ancient life forms. We know oxygen concentrations vary in caves. We know arthropods can adapt to cave life. And we know that the Appalachian cave systems are largely unexplored. The deep caves, the ones miles underground, we haven't been there. We don't know what's there. Now let me tell you what happened in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966. Between November of 66 and December of 67, over 100 people reported seeing the same thing, a creature. Descriptions were consistent. 6 to 7 feet tall, grey or brown, humanoid shape, but wrong proportions. No neck. Head seemed mounted directly on shoulders. Massive wings, 10 to 15 feet across, could fold them against its body. Eyes that reflected red in light, like animal eyeshine, but brighter. Completely silent flight. No sound of flapping wings. No sound at all. The press called it Mothman. Cryptozoology latched onto it. Skeptics said it was a sandhill crane or a barn owl. Misidentification, mass hysteria. But here's what the skeptics ignore. Over 100 witnesses, over 13 months, including police officers, a pilot, a newspaper editor. Credible people with no reason to fabricate. And the descriptions were consistent, not vague. I saw something weird reports, specific details that matched across dozens of independent witnesses who didn't know each other. A barn owl is 2 feet tall. It's brown. Its eyes don't glow red. They reflect light weakly, not the bright red luminescence witnesses described. And it doesn't fly silently when it's moving at speed. Owl flight is quiet when hunting because they fly slowly. Witnesses described this thing taking off at high speed, chasing cars at 60 miles per hour, and remaining completely silent. John Keel investigated. He was a journalist and UFO researcher. Spent months in Point Pleasant interviewing witnesses. And he documented something the sensationalist accounts leave out. The sightings clustered geographically. Most occurred near the TNT area, a World War II munitions plant built on 12,000 acres, just outside Point Pleasant. The plant was built on top of extensive natural cave systems. During construction, the military blasted into those caves to create underground storage bunkers for munitions. Hundreds of concrete domes connected to the caves. After the war ended, the facility was abandoned, left open. The caves were now accessible from the surface through the bunker entrances. Keel noticed something else. Witnesses often reported a strange smell when the creature was near. Musky, organic, not sulfuric or chemical like people report with alleged demonic encounters. Biological, like an animal. And witnesses who got close reported the wings weren't feathered. They were membranous, leathery, like bat wings, but much larger. Keel didn't think it was supernatural. His hypothesis was that these things, he believed there might be more than one, were what he called ultra-terrestrials. Not extraterrestrials from space, not interdimensional beings. Things that have always been here. Living in places we don't go, in ways we don't notice. Things that occasionally surface. And when they do, we don't have a framework to understand what we're seeing. What if he was right? What if something lives in those cave systems? Something that evolved there over millions of years. Something descended from Carboniferous arthropods that retreated underground when surface oxygen dropped. Something that adapted to darkness, developed the membranous wings of cave-dwelling insects, grew large in the high oxygen environment of certain deep cave chambers, evolved eyeshine for navigating in near-total darkness, and occasionally comes to the surface at night, when its light-sensitive eyes can function? Would it look like an insect? Would it look like a bat? Or would it look like something in between that our brains struggle to categorize? So we see it as monstrous because we don't have a mental reference for what we're actually looking at. I'm not saying that's definitely what Mothman is. I'm saying the Appalachian cave systems are unexplored enough, old enough, and geologically unique enough that dismissing the possibility without investigation is unscientific. And I'm saying that a creature evolved for cave life, emerging at night, would explain the details witnesses reported better than misidentified bird. But it's not just Mothman. The Appalachians have been home to reports of anomalous creatures for far longer than the 1960s. And those reports don't come from modern Americans prone to internet-fueled hysteria. They come from the Cherokee, and they predate European contact. The Cherokee aren't indigenous to the Appalachians. They migrated into the region around 1,000 years ago from the Great Lakes area. And when they arrived, they told the European settlers something interesting. The mountains were already inhabited. They called them the Moon-Eyed People. This isn't internet folklore. This is documented historical record. James Mooney, ethnographer working for the Smithsonian, lived among the Cherokee in the late 1800s and documented their oral traditions. Published Myths of the Cherokee in 1898. In it, he records the Cherokee accounts of the Moon-Eyed People, and the description is specific. Pale-skinned, light-colored eyes, possibly blue or grey, unusual for Native Americans. Bearded, stocky build, nocturnal. They couldn't tolerate sunlight, became disoriented and weakened in direct sun. But they had exceptional night vision, could see in darkness that was impenetrable to Cherokee. They lived primarily in caves and only emerged at night. They built stone structures for purposes the Cherokee didn't understand, and when the Cherokee migrated into the region, there was conflict. The Cherokee drove them deeper into the mountains. The Moon-Eyed People withdrew into the cave systems. But the Cherokee never claimed to have exterminated them, just displaced them, pushed them underground. For a century, this was dismissed as mythology. Vague stories about vague people. Except there's physical evidence. And nobody wants to talk about it because it doesn't fit the accepted chronology of North American settlement. Fort Mountain, Georgia. At the summit, there's a stone wall, 855 feet long, varies from 2 to 6 feet high, made from rocks carefully fitted together without mortar. It follows the mountain's ridgeline. It's not defensive. Its location doesn't protect anything strategically. You could walk around it easily. But it's aligned. One end aligns with the winter solstice sunset. The other end aligns with the summer solstice sunrise. It's not a defensive wall. It's an astronomical marker. Who built it? The Cherokee didn't. They said it was already there when they arrived. They attributed it to the Moon-Eyed People. The Creek, Shawnee, other regional tribes have no tradition of building it. European settlers didn't build it. They found it and didn't know what to make of it. Carbon dating of organic material incorporated into the wall suggests it's at least 800 to 1,000 years old, possibly much older. It predates European contact. It predates Cherokee occupation of that specific area. The official interpretation at Fort Mountain State Park says the wall was built by an unknown culture for unknown purposes. That's archaeologist code for we don't know, and we're not allowed to speculate because it doesn't fit the model. And it's not the only structure. Throughout the Appalachians, there are stone walls, cairns, petroglyphs, and constructions that don't have a clear cultural attribution. Most aren't studied. Some have been deliberately ignored because they imply the presence of stoneworking cultures in pre-Columbian America, in regions where academic consensus says no such cultures existed. The Cherokee connected these structures to the moon-eyed people, said they built them for tracking celestial events, for marking seasons, for ritual purposes related to their inability to tolerate sunlight. And the Cherokee didn't describe them as supernatural. They described them as people, strange people, different people, but people nonetheless. So who were they? Early European explorers? That doesn't work. The Cherokee encountered them before European contact, and the Cherokee would recognize Europeans as foreign. They wouldn't describe them as indigenous inhabitants. A lost pre-Columbian culture? Possible. But where's the rest of their material culture? Where are the settlements, the pottery, the tools, or something else? Something that adapted to living primarily underground, emerging only at night, developing characteristics that would result from generations of cave habitation. Troglomorphism. That's the scientific term for cave adaptation. It happens to any species that lives in caves long enough. Loss of pigmentation. No evolutionary advantage to maintaining pigment in permanent darkness. It costs energy for no benefit. Reduction or loss of eyes. Again, energy cost with no benefit. Development of enhanced non-visual senses. Longer limbs for navigating irregular surfaces. Sensitivity to light after generations in darkness. If a human population lived primarily in caves for generations, we'd expect exactly those adaptations. Pale skin, light sensitivity, enhanced night vision through genetic drift, selecting for individuals with better low-light performance. The Cherokee description of the moon-eyed people matches what we'd predict from cave adaptation. That doesn't prove they were real, but it means the description isn't random. It's consistent with a biological explanation. And here's what makes this particularly interesting. The description of pale, nocturnal, cave-dwelling people doesn't come from just the Cherokee. Shawnee oral traditions mention similar groups. Certain Iroquois legends reference cave-dwelling peoples displaced when the Iroquois expanded south. These are independent traditions from different cultures, all describing similar things in the same geographic region. That's a pattern. And patterns in folklore usually indicate something real that's being described in pre-scientific language. When multiple separated cultures report similar phenomena in the same location, that's not coincidence. That's data. But whether the moon-eyed people were cave-adapted humans, a separate hominid species that survived in isolation, or something else entirely, I can't prove. What I can prove is that someone built those stone structures. Someone was there before the Cherokee, and the Cherokee identified them as a distinct population with specific characteristics that match cave adaptation. That's documented history, not internet myth. Now let's talk about why strange things happen in the Appalachians specifically. Why these mountains and not the Rockies? Why this region generates more reports of anomalous phenomena than anywhere else in North America? The answer is in the geology. And the geology is measurable, verifiable, not speculation. The Appalachians are primarily metamorphic rock, gneiss, schist, and massive amounts of quartz. The region contains some of the highest concentrations of quartz deposits in North America. Quartz veins run through the entire mountain range. In some areas, The bedrock is 40% quartz or higher, and quartz has a property that matters: piezoelectricity. When you compress quartz crystal, it generates electrical voltage. When you apply voltage to quartz, it vibrates at a precise frequency. This isn't controversial. It's why quartz is used in watches and electronics. It's a reliable frequency generator and a mechanical to electrical energy converter. Basic physics. The Appalachians have been under tectonic compression for 480 million years. The rock layers are folded, faulted, compressed. That compression is constant. It's not dramatic like earthquake compression. It's slow, gradual, but it's constant pressure on billions of tons of quartz. And that generates electrical potential. The entire mountain range is effectively a massive, slow-discharge battery. This has been measured. Geologists studying earthquake precursors have documented electromagnetic anomalies in quartz-rich regions before seismic events. The phenomenon is called earthquake lights, luminous glows or flashes seen before or during earthquakes. The leading hypothesis is piezoelectric discharge from stressed quartz, producing visible light when the discharge is strong enough. But it's not just earthquakes. The Appalachians are under constant stress, and certain locations show persistent electromagnetic anomalies, which brings us to Brown Mountain, North Carolina. Since at least the 1800s, possibly earlier, people have reported strange lights on Brown Mountain, floating orbs, ranging from basketball-sized to car-sized, moving independently, not following terrain, appearing and disappearing without pattern. The lights are visible from multiple vantage points. Thousands of people have seen them. They've been photographed, recorded on video. They're not ball lightning, wrong characteristics, wrong behavior. They're not swamp gas. Brown Mountain has no swamp. They're not car headlights. They were reported before cars existed. The US Geological Survey investigated in 1913, sent a team, documented the lights, couldn't explain them, concluded they were real, but origin unknown. Another investigation in 1964 reached the same conclusion. The lights exist. They're observable. They're not conventional atmospheric phenomena. And there's no satisfactory explanation. But there's a correlation. The lights appear most frequently during periods of high barometric pressure. When atmospheric pressure increases, it increases pressure on the rock. More pressure on the quartz means more piezoelectric generation. And Brown Mountain is particularly quartz-rich. The correlation between high-pressure weather systems and increased light sightings is statistically significant. I'm not claiming this explains every strange light in the Appalachians, but it demonstrates that these mountains generate measurable electromagnetic phenomena based on their mineral composition and geological stress. That's not folklore, that's physics. And here's where it connects to everything else. Electromagnetic fields affect biology. We know this. Transcranial magnetic stimulation is an FDA-approved treatment for depression. It uses magnetic fields to alter neural activity. Strong electromagnetic fields can cause hallucinations, confusion, memory disruption, spatial disorientation. This is documented, measurable, reproducible. If the Appalachians generate persistent electromagnetic anomalies from piezoelectric discharge, those fields could affect human neurology, could cause disorientation, could impair navigation, could produce sensations of being watched or followed by affecting the temporal lobe, which is sensitive to electromagnetic stimulation. and could potentially explain why people get lost in these mountains in ways that don't make sense. Why search dogs lose sense. Why people vanish from trails and are found miles away in terrain they couldn't have crossed. David Paulides documented this pattern in his Missing 411 series. Former law enforcement officer who spent years investigating disappearances in national parks. He doesn't speculate about causes. He just documents cases and patterns. And one pattern is geographic clustering. The Appalachians are a hotspot. Not because more people visit. They don't. The Rockies have much higher visitation, but lower disappearance rates adjusted for visitor numbers. Another pattern. Many disappearances occur in areas with high quartz content. People vanish from trails without trace. Search dogs track someone for a short distance, then lose the scent completely, as if the person simply ceased to exist at that point. People are found miles from where they vanished, in areas that were already searched, sometimes in physically impossible locations they couldn't have reached. Paulides doesn't claim to know why. He just notes the pattern. But the geographic correlation with quartz-rich regions is striking. And if electromagnetic anomalies can affect instruments, which they can, compasses malfunction in high EM areas, why couldn't they affect human brain function? We're electrical beings. Our neurons fire electrically. Introduce a strong external EM field, and neural activity gets disrupted. I'm not saying this explains every disappearance, but it provides a mechanism that's testable, and it's based on known geology and documented physics. There's another effect these mountains produce. Infrasound, sound below the range of human hearing. Below 20 hertz. We can't hear it consciously, but it affects us physically. Low-frequency sound causes vibration, and depending on the frequency, that vibration produces specific effects. 19 hertz is the resonant frequency of the human eyeball. At that frequency, sound causes the eyeball to vibrate slightly. That vibration creates visual distortions. Specifically, people see grey shapes in peripheral vision, shadows that aren't there. A sense of presence when alone. Vic Tandy was an engineer at Coventry University. In 1998, he was working late in a laboratory that was supposedly haunted. He experienced classic haunting symptoms. Oppressive sense of dread. Feeling of being watched. Saw a grey figure in peripheral vision that vanished when he looked directly at it. Cold sensations. All the standard ghost signs. Then he discovered the lab had an extraction fan that was producing a standing wave at 19 hertz. Infrasound. Below hearing, but causing physical effects. When he modified the fan to eliminate the standing wave, the haunting stopped immediately. No more grey figures. No more dread. He published a paper called The Ghost in the Machine, documenting the effect. 6 to 9 hertz produces extreme anxiety, fear responses, and a sense of impending disaster. NASA studied these effects on astronauts because rocket engines and spacecraft vibrations can produce these frequencies. Prolonged exposure causes psychological distress severe enough to impair function. Wind moving through valleys generates infrasound. Water flowing through underground caverns generates infrasound. The Appalachians, with their complex topography and extensive cave systems, generate natural infrasound constantly. Different frequencies in different locations depending on wind patterns, cave geometry, and water flow. Could that explain the persistent sense of wrongness people report? The feeling of being watched when alone. The fear response that seems disproportionate to any visible threat. You're not imagining it. You're physically responding to sound you can't consciously hear, but that's affecting your nervous system. Layer all these factors. 480 million years of evolutionary isolation, creating cave ecosystems we haven't fully explored. High oxygen pockets in cave systems that could preserve ancient life forms. Massive quartz deposits generating electromagnetic anomalies that affect neurology and instruments. Topography generating infrasound that produces fear and visual hallucinations. And you don't need supernatural explanations for why the Appalachians feel different. They are different, measurably, objectively, in ways that affect both what could live there and how humans perceive it when they're there. The folklore isn't superstition, it's practical response to observable phenomena. When multiple generations report hearing voices that call people away from safety, and those people often don't return, the correct response is to encode, don't follow the voices into culture. You don't need to understand the mechanism. You just need to know the rule works. When people report seeing creatures that don't match known animals, and those sightings cluster around cave entrances, the correct response is to avoid those areas at night. The Cherokee understood this. Their relationship with the mountains wasn't about conquest or control. It was about coexistence with something they recognized as powerful and old. They didn't try to eliminate the moon-eyed people. They just established boundaries. Don't go into certain areas. Don't disturb certain places. Respect what's already here. European settlers brought a different mindset. Tame the wilderness. Conquer nature, exploit resources. And the folklore that European-descended Appalachians developed reflects fear rather than respect. Not because the mountains changed, because the relationship changed. The Cherokee came as guests in a place they recognized as already occupied. Settlers came as owners. And the mountains don't recognize ownership. They're 480 million years old. They've seen species emerge and go extinct. They've seen continents collide and separate. They don't care about human claims of territory. They just exist. Ancient. Hollow. Watching. So what are the Appalachians? They're a 480 million year old mountain range that has witnessed the entire history of complex life on land. They contain some of the most extensive cave systems on Earth, creating environments isolated enough to preserve ancient lineages we haven't discovered. They're composed of quartz-rich rock that generates measurable electromagnetic anomalies, affecting both instruments and human neurology. They produce natural infrasound that causes documented psychological effects. And they've been inhabited by humans long enough that cultural memory has encoded warnings about their properties in folklore that persists because it works. That's not supernatural. That's ecology, geology, biology, and physics intersecting in unusual ways to produce a place that operates differently from anywhere else. Do I think Mothman is definitely a Carboniferous arthropod that survived in the caves? No. I think people saw something. Over 100 witnesses across 13 months aren't all mistaken. I think what they saw could be something that lives in those caves, something adapted to darkness that occasionally surfaces. Something our brains don't have a category for, so we perceive it as monstrous because that's the closest match our pattern recognition can find. Do I think the moon-eyed people were cave-adapted humans? I think someone built those stone structures. The Cherokee identified them as built by a pre-existing population with specific characteristics that match cave adaptation. Whether that population was human, a related hominid species, or something else, I don't know. But dismissing the possibility requires ignoring documented structures and recorded oral traditions from multiple cultures. Do I think the mountains are haunted? I think they produce electromagnetic and acoustic conditions that affect human perception in ways we're only beginning to understand. And I think 480 million years of biological evolution in isolated cave systems could produce organisms we haven't catalogued yet. Not because I want to believe in monsters, because unexplored cave systems have consistently yielded new species every time we explore them, and we've only explored a fraction of what's down there. We like to think we've mapped everything, understood everything, classified everything, but the deepest Appalachian cave systems remain unexplored. We've mapped perhaps 10% of the total estimated cave length. The deep caves, the ones that descend miles underground, we haven't reached them. We don't have the technology yet. We don't know what's down there. And maybe that's appropriate. Maybe some places should remain unexplored. Maybe the feeling of wrongness you get deep in those forests isn't a malfunction of your nervous system. Maybe it's accurate perception. You're in a place that's been operating according to its own rules for nearly 500 million years. You're the newcomer. You're the temporary visitor in a place that existed before your species evolved, before your entire order of mammals existed, before the dinosaurs, before anything you'd recognize as familiar. The Appalachians were here when life was learning to leave the ocean. They watched the first vertebrates develop jaws. They watched the first forests grow. They watched insects learn to fly. They watched reptiles develop. They watched dinosaurs rise and fall. They watched mammals emerge from the ruins. They watched ice ages come and go. They watched humans finally arrive. Recently, briefly, temporarily. And they're still here. Still old. Still hollow. Still full of caves we haven't explored and systems we don't understand. Still generating their electromagnetic fields and their infrasonic frequencies. Still harboring whatever evolved in their depths during 480 million years of isolation. When you're hiking in those mountains, when the mist is thick and the silence is oppressive, when you hear something that sounds like your name being called from deeper in the forest, remember the rule. You didn't hear anything. Don't answer. Don't investigate. Don't turn around. Just keep walking. Because that rule was developed by people who lived in these mountains for generations. People who learned through trial and error what works. And the rule works. It's survived in culture because the people who follow it survive. And the people who don't, sometimes we find them miles from where they should be. Sometimes we don't find them at all. The Appalachians aren't wrong. They're not haunted. They're not evil. They're just old. Older than almost anything else on the surface of this planet. Old enough that the rules are different. Old enough that evolution took different paths in their depths. Old enough that what lives there doesn't fit our categories of normal. They were here before us. They witnessed our evolution. They watched our ancestors develop into humans. And they'll be here long after we're gone. Still eroding. Still ancient. Still keeping their secrets in caves too deep for us to explore. Still generating their fields and their sounds and their effects. Still being what they've always been. And when you feel watched in those forests, you probably are being watched. Not by ghosts, not by demons, by something that lives there. Something that's been there far longer than you have. Something that has every right to be there because it was here first. You're in its home. You're the intruder. And the only appropriate response to that recognition isn't fear. It's humility, respect, and following the rules that people who understand these mountains better than you have passed down. Don't answer when you hear your name. Don't follow the voices. Don't investigate the sounds. Just keep walking, because you're a guest in a place that's 480 million years old. And guests who respect the house rules tend to leave safely. The ones who don't, well, the mountains keep those.